What if I told you the universe might be running on a kind of source code, a hidden mathematical system that lays out the structure for, well, everything? Today, we're going to break down a really fascinating model that claims to be exactly that. So let's just dive right into that question. Is reality actually built on some kind of hidden mathematical code? The source material we're digging into today argues that, yeah, it is, and that this code can be unpacked using a very specific set of numbers and formulas. So here is our roadmap. We're going to start with the foundational numbers that kind of act like a mathematical seal. Then we'll look at the static blueprint of this reality and the dynamic engine that makes it all run. And finally, we'll deconstruct the core formula, this thing called the 12-node generator, and see how it creates this incredibly ordered system.
Okay, so where do we even begin? Well, before we can understand the engine, we need to know the basic rules of the road. According to these sources, the whole system is built on just a few key numbers that act as its mathematical foundation.
It all starts with the number 19. The source material calls this a discrete witness. You can think of it like a mathematical signature or a seal that's embedded in the structure of things. The main example they give is its role inside the structure of the Quran, where the number 19 just keeps showing up as a core organizing principle. And the idea builds from there. You take that constant, 19, and you multiply it by 6, a number that's said to represent a full cycle of creation. And what do you get? 114. That's the total number of chapters or surahs in the Quran. Now, in this model, that's no accident. It's a sign of a complete, mathematically balanced system.
And you guessed it, the pattern keeps going. The total number of verses, 6,236, is also a perfect multiple of 19. This really reinforces the idea of a complete address space, basically a system where every single little part can be mathematically accounted for, all locked into this foundational structure.
All right, now that we've got the foundational numbers down, let's look at the actual blueprint they build. The source material calls this the 237 architecture, and it's described as the static, unchanging framework of reality. It's like the skeleton of the system. So this architecture breaks reality down into 3 core functions. You've got 2, which stands for duality, all the fundamental pairs of creation, like light and dark, heaven and earth. Then there's 3, the triad, which is a structure for processing information and testing. And finally, 7, which represents completion, resolution, the final state of things. This table here really helps visualize this whole concept as a kind of spine. It maps each of those numbers to a specific job and a specific layer. You can see how 2 maps to the dual fields of light and sound, 3 lines up with potential right at the origin, and 7 represents the completed layers of existence. So if 237 is the static skeleton, then 369 is the dynamic engine. It's the muscle. This is the process that actually drives creation and change within that fixed architecture. And of course, you can't really talk about 3, 6, and 9 without mentioning this famous quote attributed to Nikola Tesla. The source material brings this up to frame this whole sequence not as some kind of simple numerology, but as a fundamental process that governs energy, vibration, and ultimately physical form. So how does this engine actually work? Well, it's a 3-stage process. 3 is that initial spark of pure potential. 6 is the messy part, the oscillation, the process of interaction and vibration. And 9, that's the final stabilized form, the result. So you have potential, process, and then product. Now, this is where the model makes a really fascinating move. It connects this seemingly mystical concept directly to hard mathematics. It actually maps the 369 stages to the behavior of a cubic equation. The key is this thing called the discriminant, which is just a part of the formula that tells you what kind of answer you're going to get. So when the discriminant is positive, you get 3 distinct answers, mirroring that oscillatory, process-heavy nature of the number 6. But when it's negative, you get one single stable answer, which mirrors the stabilized form of 9. It's an attempt to show that this cosmic engine is actually grounded in the fundamental rules of mathematics. Okay, so we've got the constants, the static frame, and the dynamic engine. Now let's get to the actual line of code that puts it all together, the 12-node generator. So how do we build this thing? It's actually just 4 simple steps. First, you define your total space, K, like that 6,236 verses we talked about. Second, you just pick a starting point, X, any number in that space. Third, you create a rhythm, a really simple alternating step of 10, then 9, then 10, then 9.
And finally, you calculate the cumulative path, which just means at every step, you add up all the previous steps. It's really those 4 simple inputs that power this entire system. And here it is, the engine itself. Let's break this down real quick. To find the position of any of the 12 nodes, you take your starting point x and you add the cumulative path s sub k. Then you run that number through a modulo of the total space k. Now, modulo is just a math operation that gives you the remainder of a division. It's what keeps the path from flying off the board. It forces it to wrap around, kind of like the numbers on a clock. Finally, you add 1. That's it. This simple formula is what generates all the complex order we're about to see.
Now, when you run this formula, one of 2 things can happen. Those 12 steps always add up to 114. So, if your total space, k, is a perfect multiple of 114, you get a perfectly closed loop. It ends exactly where it began. But if it's not, the ring of 12 nodes still forms, but it doesn't close perfectly. It shifts just a tiny bit with each cycle. The system calls this precession. You can think of it like a spinning top that has a slight wobble as it spins. And this brings us to the big payoff. Why go through all this math? Because the output of this formula isn't just a random scatter of numbers. It creates a beautifully ordered system that naturally embodies all the principles we've been talking about. And here is the key insight. This is the really wild part. The 12 nodes that are created by that simple formula, they don't just land randomly. They automatically sort themselves into that 2-3-7 structure we talked about. The first 2 nodes become pivots, the next 3 act as information buffers, and the final 7 become the propagation nodes. The static architecture isn't some separate rule you have to apply. It emerges directly from the math of the generator. But it doesn't stop there. The dynamic 369 engine also shows up as natural symmetries within this 12-node orbit. The geometry of the orbit has these 3-phase cycles, a perfect mirror symmetry between any node and the one 6 steps away, and this 9-phase tendency for the values to build towards closure. Both the static blueprint and the dynamic engine are encoded right into the geometry that the formula creates. So, what's the ultimate takeaway here? It's that this whole thing is presented as a fully unified system. That simple alternating step of 9 and 10 in the generator formula, that's the one single key that unlocks everything else. It generates the orbit, and from that orbit, the 2-3-7 static rolls and the 3-6-9 dynamic symmetries just emerge, all on their own. One simple rhythm creates a complex, ordered universe. Which leaves us with one last, pretty big thought. If a mathematical system this elegant and self-contained actually exists, what is it describing? Is it a blueprint for the external universe, the cosmos? Or is it describing something much more internal, a fundamental map of consciousness itself?